Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So this week the only real news that we have is Eldritch Moon finally hitting the competitive scene, and we did have a significantly large tournament in the Star City Open this weekend, and I think there's a few other tournaments in Japan, but we're really going to focus on the Open. And if you haven't already gone over to MTG Goldfish, I highly suggest that you go and read this article by Seth, which is Eldritch Moon Week 1, What We've Learned. And he just does a great job at breaking down the metagame and showing what decks did well, what decks fell flat. And I'm not going to talk too much about it. You can just come over here and read this article, and that way you can kind of get a gist for Standard. Now, right now is kind of a weird time to invest in Standard because all of the new cards, there's usually a few breakout cards from the set that were undervalued that then do increase in price. Usually that happens after the Pro Tour, though, not necessarily right after a Star City Open. So keep your eyes open at the Pro Tour, especially day one, and especially camera time videos for any cards that don't see play in any of these large or heavily played decks right now, mainly being Bant Control. Bant Control is back to the #1 deck, but I do like this Soul Tie Control by Ali Antrazi that he played here because we saw this history tends to repeat itself. We might see the exact same thing happen. So week 1, when Shadows over Innistrad came out, which is a larger set which has a lot more effect on the metagame, we saw humans be the top dog. And then we saw Bant decks start to beat out the human decks, these Bant Collected Company decks. And then at the Pro Tour, we saw the green-white tokens and the Language-based decks really take out the Bant decks. Even though Bant Company decks were the most played decks at the Pro Tour, there was only one in the top 8, and they overwhelmingly did the worst out of all the quote-unquote tier decks. And Green White Tokens was kind of like a new player, and then became the dominant deck. And we've seen this what I like to call a self-regulated Standard, where as soon as one of these decks becomes big, then other decks come to kind of what we call farm out those decks and then become the top tier deck. However, green-white tokens, I agree with Seth's interpretation here, where if some are saying the green-white token is dead. I agree. I think Spell Queller is going to be the card that 100% puts the nail in the coffin because it's exactly the card that Bant Company needed to take out green-white tokens. Beforehand, they were trying to rely on the Morph counterspell, the 2-1, the Stratus Dancer, to try to combat these Planeswalker-based decks. So you can't let them resolve a Planeswalker. They're going to get too much value. But now between Reflector Mage and Spell Queller, green-white tokens just doesn't have any tools really to compete with Bant Company. I mean, the best they can hope for is Tragic Arrogance, and now Spell Queller is just a very solid answer towards even that. So one of the things, too, that I found out when I used to run white-blue flyers, which got so much better because you can just now go over to a Spirit Tribal, is that sort of deck was the best deck against these tokens-based, these green-white tokens. Green-white tokens is very good against humans because it was able to establish like early Hangerback Walkers and Sylvan Advocates and ways to protect the Nissa or Gideon later on, and then as Avacyn comes out, you're ahead at that point, and the humans have just kind of lost steam. But flyers, I was able to always attack over top of like the Sylvan Advocates and the Lamholt Pacifists, and then be able to take out their Planeswalkers, save up counterspell for cards like Tragic Arrogance, and then it was one of the easier matchups. So I think green-white tokens really suffers to now blue-white flyers, which is now spirits with Spell Queller, so the nail in the coffin, and then same thing with Bant Company now having a very good answer towards Spell Queller. So we should see the value of Gideon and Nissa drop. And so if you have any of those, I think now's the time possibly either get out of them or just like hold tight, because rotation will definitely mix things up, because we are seeing still a ton of cards from Dragons and from Origins that are top tier cards. So yeah, I think that we are going to see company decks reign supreme until the Pro Tour, but I'm telling you, I think Pro Tour is going to show us that people are not going to... It's called the metagame for a reason. So usually you either play the top deck, play the deck that beats the top deck, or play the deck that beats the deck that beats the top deck. And I think that we might see that sort of answer. So like these language-based decks, I mean, these are good. These are really good. I think that Ali Antrazi's deck is the best to combat Bant control, just because it establishes kind of these early pressure cards like the Sylvan Advocate or the Jace Vryn's Prodigy. The Bant Company are going to have to establish their own board, and then you can just completely punish them with Languish, which yes can get quelled, counterspelled by the spell Queller, but there still is a lot of activity with this deck, and then eventually, even if the Languish gets countered, then you can just kill the spell Queller and still wipe the board with the Grasp of Darknesses. I think that going forward, it's going to be a heavy Grasp of Darkness deck. I think that Transgress the Mind is incredibly good to combat these decks, and people will start to adjust. Like, because Transgress the Mind was kind of my go-to deck versus Bant, because when I used to play against Bant, there was really just Collected Company and Reflector Mage to a little bit of a point, but it was the cards, most of the cards I wanted to get rid of out of the Bant Company decks had converted mana cost 3 or greater. So Transgress was just such a powerhouse versus those type of decks. So anyway, back to why I don't like investing in Standard at this point in time is the cards that people need to pick up copies of, since we haven't really seen much of a metagame switch, are going to be from Eldritch Moon, which, just because packs are going to be opened and opened and opened so often as it's going to be drafted as a 2 of with 1 of Shadows of Innistrad, that it's just, even the cards that have the potential to go up are more likely to keep dropping just because more supply enters the realm or the player base. So yeah, again, go check out this article. There's not much more I can say about Standard as far as what did good, what did bad, than what MTG Goldfish covers. What I do want to talk about is Modern. So first card I want to talk about is Thalia, because Thalia, the new one's out of Shadows of Innistrad, everyone was talking is going to be a playable card in Modern. Well, the deck that really wanted it, I think this Mono White Hate Bears, didn't even have one in the sideboard. So this one took 4th place at the, let's just look at the overall list here from Star City Games. The deck that took it down was Affinity. Affinity is always a good deck when there's a brand new metagame. I mean, a set like this has very little to the overall. I mean, the more sets that actually come out, the less, unless there's a card like Treasure Cruise in the format, it's not going to be really format warping or even format defining, because we do have a very established metagame. I think a banning or an unbanning is going to have a lot more effect than any type of new set. So Affinity is always a good deck when people aren't expecting it. It can just completely demolish your opponent. I have been taking out Stony Silences, for example, just because Affinity hasn't really showed up on my radar very often. Affinity had no changes to the deck. We had some Channel Fireball articles trying to really promote the Lupine prototype, which is the 5/5 for 2 mana, saying that they go Hellbent by turn 4 quite often. Hellbent is when you have no cards in hand, quite often in Affinity. And so the 5/5, I just thinking in Modern, like a 5/5 that doesn't have any sort of evasion, it's definitely not an Ensoul Artifact. Like in Soul Artifact, yes, you can get 2 for 1. In the prototype, not so much. But I don't think that it's going to show or it's going to have a place in most Affinity decks. I think that the 2-drop slot is the most competitive slot. That's your Arcbound Ravager. That's your Steel Overseer. And then it's even start competing with like the 3-drops, as they're very similar what turn you play 2 and 3. Usually going to be on turn 2 if it's going to be with like a Mox Opal or with a Springleaf Drum. The 2 to 3 is not that big of a jump in Affinity. So then we had a Merfolk deck, and Merfolk didn't have anything new. So the first deck I checked out was Green White Hate Bears. Okay, is Thalia going to be in this deck? So we see, if it'll load here, no Thalias. Well, now what they're calling Baby Thalia, the Thalia from Dark Ascension was as a 4 of, as usually it is in a Hate Bears deck, because it's very powerful against the Ad Nauseams, the Escape Shifts, the Storms, those type of decks. And it actually is pretty good versus Jund and other, even decks that play like Path to Exile type removal, like a Nahiri Jeskai. Thalia can sit them back a turn where you can start getting kind of your locks going with the green-white or just the mono-white Hate Bears. So no changes, not any cards from the new set in this deck. So Green White Hate Bears is unchanged. In fact, I went through all of these decks, and there was very, very little change. Nothing here in the Abzan deck, for example. Not a card in it. Until we got to this mono-white Hate Bears, and you can see there is a 4 of Selfless Spirit. So the mono-white Hate Bears absolutely do like the Selfless Spirit. It protects them against board wipe-ish. I did a whole analysis of this on my Soul Sisters deck, or what cards from Eldritch Moon you could play in Soul Sisters. And I just think the Selfless Spirit is just weaker than Brent Forge Tender in most scenarios. If decks do start to play like cards like Damnation, if they do start to play Wrath of Gods and other type effects, then yes, Selfless Spirit would be a better card to bring in. I think it's better in Hate Bears because you're actually trading a card for a better card. In Soul Sisters, like if you have a Selfless Spirit out, Selfless Spirit most likely is going to be one of your better cards. So, I mean, you're only protecting Johnny's Primate or a Sarah's Ascendant, which are 1 and 2 mana. I don't think it's worth to try to protect it. In this deck, you can actually protect more key cards. So, I kind of do like the Selfless Spirit in this one. But not so much in Soul Sisters. But it did show that it is a modern worthy card. I knew it was going to be because people already played I think it's a Rhino that gave things indestructible. Did the exact same thing as this card did. So the Coco decks will probably want the Selfless Spirit. The Court of Calling decks also want the Selfless Spirit. The metagame didn't show a lot of those type of decks. It had a very diverse metagame though. So I've been really frustrated with Modern, at least on MTGO, because it seems like it's the same deck over and over and over and over and over again. You see just a ton of Infect or Suicide Zoo, which, let's be honest, are the exact same deck. They're both trying to kill by turn 2, turn 3. So, anywho, yeah, lots and lots and lots of diversity, but really not too much new from the Eldritch Moon. There was this 5-color aggro deck that was playing a 3 of Spell Queller. So again, that's kind of the reason why I think that finance for investing in Eldritch Moon has kind of fallen flat, because these are already cards that were very, very, very hyped. The Spell Queller is an insanely expensive card already, and the Selfless Spirit is actually starting to go up. And we've seen the fact that Sylvan Advocate has a very hard time getting over $5. I do not like investing in rares at this level. $3.50, you probably can max it out, top it out at $6. Now, people will say, well, what about Collected Company? Collected Company sees play in casual, sees play in competitive, both modern and standard. And it was the form, it was like the defining card in all of those decks. Like, so many decks were company decks. I was throwing it in Goblins and Merfolk and even Werewolf Tribals and Standard and things like that. So Collected Company will always have demand from the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 like type of deck, if there even is a tier 5 deck. But the casual, the kitchen table people want it. This card, yeah, maybe it does have that appeal over Sylvan Advocate, because Sylvan Advocate might just be more boring of a card than something that can give your cards indestructible. But I have a hard time seeing Selfless Spirit outclassing a card like Sylvan Advocate that got stuck at the $5 range and saw so much play. So again, there's really nothing from Eldritch Moon that I saw from this set that I think warrants a lot of investment, with the exception of probably Grim Flayer. Now, Grim Flayer is a mythic at 9 that did see 4 of in the various Delirium-based decks, and I think that reminds me a ton of Sylvan Advocate. It's very easy to get up to a 4/4. So 2 mana for a 4/4. This reminds me a lot of the Rakshasa Death Dealer back in the day. I tested this card out. It's absolutely bonkers good with the Scry 3. It's better than Scry 3. It's really manipulate the top of your library. Liliana kind of eating my words with from there was a lot of decks that did run Liliana, but I was very disappointed with the amount of copies. Very similar to what I would say about Gideon. Gideon topped out about $25 and then stabilized at $20. And Gideon was the centerpiece of green-white tokens. It was also a powerhouse in black-white control. It was kind of the central focus on black-white control. And, well, a lot of black-white control. It's not all of them, because it was just a planeswalker that had such an upside. And also, you'd see it in sideboards of even like humans and company decks. So Liliana, I think, I have a hard time seeing it going up anymore. I think you should just get out of these. $28 is higher than the 23 that I told you get out of Liliana. But there's a lot of decks where people are saying, oh, the card was insane, the card was insane. I think they're referring to it was really good versus humans, which did have a huge presence at the Star City Open, which actually did the worst of all of the decks there. You can go back and check that article out that Seth did for MTG Goldfish, and he talks about how it went from like such a dominant rate of being played, and it actually was still, but had a very, very low percentage of going into day 2, and then the amount of them that actually got into top 64, top 32, or whatever the metric you want to do was extremely low. And I think Liliana is one of those reasons, because that's the one deck that this card does do very well against, because you kill a card, pump it up to 4, then they have to either waste an attack into Liliana if you have some way to actually protect it, and then you can actually just languish the next turn. But a ton of these control-based decks that I actually saw that were, or even Delirium-based decks, were running even a 1 of or a 2 of for Liliana, and it wasn't a 4 of. There's only like one deck that I really saw that was running a 4 of. So Eldritch Evolution was another one that fell incredibly flat. It might just take more brewers to get it going. People really like the Ishkana Graph Widower. So it is good because you get the 3 1/2 green spider tokens on the battlefild with Delirium, but you need Delirium, otherwise this card is so bad. So you have to rely on Delirium. Most people say by turn 5 you do have Delirium. In a dedicated deck, that's probably true. So this is just like a better Brood Monitor, which then can be flickered. So I do like this. I think I undervalued this card. At first, I didn't like the 3/5 body, and just the effect just seemed kind of weak. But now in a standard-based deck, we have to start preparing for a future, I think Ishkana Graph Widower actually is a card that if it continues to go lower than 9, possibly this is a card you can invest in. We didn't see any like donate decks. We didn't see any decimator decks. We did see a few of these emerge type cards, and emerge does seem to be a powerful base mechanic, even just in any old deck. Man, I drafted, actually got forced the last pack. I ended up picking up 3 of the 3/4 emerge draw card for 6, I believe it is. And I didn't want to put it in initially in my deck because I was running a very low curve with blue white flyers. And this was, of course, a triple Eldritch Moon draft. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to put them in and see how well they do. They do cost 7 mana to hard cast them. But what I was doing is just like trading all of these dead 3-drops up. Didn't even have any of the cards that really went with Emerge, and it was just trading up and then drawing a card or getting the tap 4 permanents for this one that you see, Elder Deep Fiend, and that is insanely powerful of a mechanic. So I do like Emerge going forward. It fits in the Eldrazi theme too. This makes the Sanctum of Ugin a ton better, and so just keep these cards in mind for rotation. This is going to be a very, very, very quick 2 months for rotation. So we're almost into August. It rotates the end of September, I believe. So there's not a lot of time left for the Bant Company decks, because Collected Company, the namesake of the deck, will be gone, and that will switch everything up. I think even cards like Spell Queller get a lot weaker because of it. So again, those are the cards that I would start to be looking if they keep falling, or if you can get good deals off of them. Any of these like really, really powerful cards, Spoiler Season's the best to start to really get down to the nitty-gritty of what cards might be viable. So just wait till then. But if these, I like these when these start to go like bulk price, $1.50, which I think a lot of these that are like $3-4 will end up doing, and that's the time to pick them up. So again, not a good time. So all in all, not a very not a lot of information here for this Market Monday. In fact, I don't really have any picks to invest in. Like, it's very, very stale. We're at the height of summer. This is where Magic is the least popular, I would say. Pokemon Go, for example, has put like a really, really big dent in Magic at the moment. I think that the trend will die off and people will eventually come back to playing card games, but for now, a lot of our people, our local game store, are just out playing Pokemon Go, which that actually does have an effect on the market. So right now, it's just incredibly stale for a new set coming out, and the decks are incredibly stale in both Modern and in Standard, so it's just not the time, I think, to really push the button on investments per se. There isn't really anything that stands out like I've had in most Market Mondays. But anyway, it's still worth talking about. I hope you learned a little bit about the metagame, what has potential to possibly go up if we do see a certain deck, like an Emerge type deck, come forward. Just always be on the vigilance. Always look out for that potential market swing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. One last thing that we do that I need to mention, I'm going to do a video on this, so be looking forward to that, is we do have a Twitter campaign. It has 1 week left. It is your favorite interaction with Soulfire Grandmaster. You can check out my Twitter if you're not already following me on Twitter at RogueDeckBuild for more information. Again, I'll have a video coming up soon that will showcase that in a new competition, or an old competition that we are reviving for August, called the Rogue Master Brewer. So hope to see you there. This has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this week's episode of the Rogue Market. I hope it helps. If you're interested in seeing more videos for the Rogue Market, you can click on the link here, as well as click on the link to the right to go to our store to support Rogue Deck Builder. We have upcoming gear to be added to the site, so keep checking back frequently. As always, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.